March 14th, 1989, Mark Kilroy was kidnapped in the city of Matamoros in Tamaulipas, Mexico. Mark was on a vacation for spring break from his college when he became the victim of a human sacrifice ring and was tortured and eventually killed for a narcotics trafficking ring that believed human sacrifices kept them safe from law enforcement. This is the Matamoros Human Sacrifice Ring. On March 10th, 1989, Mark Kilroy was picked up by his friend Bradley Moore at the University of Texas at Austin. From there, the two drove down to Santa Fe, where they picked up two other friends, Bill Huddleston and Brent Martin. From there, the four drove down to vacation in South Padre Island, Texas. After a couple days of partying in South Padre Island, the four made their way down to Mexico. On March 13th, Mark and his friends went to Matamoros. The night consisted of bar hopping and clubbing. Some of the bars included the likes of Los Sombreros and the London Pub, which rebranded itself as Hard Rock Cafe during spring break. Eventually, the friends were separated due to the large crowds of drunk tourists and tried to regroup. As the night went on, Mark eventually found himself separated from the group completely. He was near a car outside of a bar talking to a girl when he was found by his friend Huddleston. As Huddleston drunkenly made his way towards Mark, he ran into an alleyway to urinate. But when he returned for Mark was nowhere to be found. Mark's friends spent hours looking for him, even way after the tourists had cleared out and the partying had died out on the entire street. Eventually, they assumed Mark had made his way back across the border and was at the car or had left with the girl he was talking to. Mark's friends decided to go back to South Padre Island. But when morning came around, Mark still hadn't shown up, and his friends called the police to report Mark missing. Mark's investigation began as a routine investigation. Authorities had even told his friends that most disappearances for young adults around popular vacation spots usually end with the disappearing person turning up after a couple of days, typically not remembering anything due to blacking out. Mark's investigation gained momentum when the news spread through his family, where it reached his uncle, Ken Kilroy, who worked at the U.S. Customs Service in Los Angeles, where he was able to have a task force created in Brownsville specifically for Mark. After some tension with the state and municipal police trying to shift the investigation back into Brownsville, word of Mark's disappearance reached the community where people rallied together to support the search. Mark's disappearance even gained national attention when it was talked about on a national television show, America's Most Wanted, which brought a lot of tips to the investigation, none of which were actually able to be used by the task force. The case was at a lull. The biggest break in the case came on April 1st, when a truck sped past a drug checkpoint on the highway connecting Matamoros to Reynosa. Instead of chasing after the truck, the police followed the truck in an unmarked car. The truck was then followed to a Santa Elena ranch outside of Matamoros. The police pulled away and observed from afar. After a while, the truck went back into town, but Police managed to identify the driver as Serafin Hernandez Garcia, the nephew of a known drug lord in the area. Rather than arrest him, the police decided to watch the house over time to gather information so that they can then make a series of arrests. After Serafin left, the police proceeded to move in on the ranch house, where they found drugs and cult paraphernalia. After watching the ranch house for some time, on April 9th, the police moved in on the ranch and made a series of arrests, including Serafin, his uncle Elio Hernandez Rivera, cult members David Serna Valdez, Sergio Martinez Salinas, and Domingo Reyes Bustamante, and a caretaker of the house. When questioned, the caretaker was able to identify Mark through a photograph and proceeded to point out a shack on the property. He then also revealed that many people connected to Serafin and Elio frequently visited the ranch. Serafin was questioned separately. He revealed that a man named Adolfo Constanzo had led and ordered the rituals to be carried out. The purpose of these rituals were to fuel the belief that these sacrifices granted them immunity from the law, protection, and gave them strength and abundance. Serafin also spoke about how Mark was captured. Serafin and some of his men spotted Mark the night of March 14th, where they drove up beside him, tried grabbing him and throwing him into a truck. But Mark managed to wrestle his way out and stumble away down the street, only to be intercepted by another truck where more cult members were waiting. After his capture, Mark was then blindfolded, tied up, and driven down to the ranch, where he was left in the truck overnight and then moved into the shed on the property the morning of March 15th. After being moved, he was fed bread, eggs, and water by the ranch caretaker. The night of March 15th, Adolfo and some of his men went to see Mark. That night, Mark was tortured, beaten, and sodomized. He was then finished off by Adolfo, who killed Mark by striking the back of his head and neck with a machete. The men then proceeded to cut off Mark's legs to facilitate the burial, which was part of the ritual. They then proceeded to stick a wire up his spinal column to later come back for the remains. Mark's brain was then removed and boiled in a nana, an African pot used by Constanzo to brew remains of both animals and people. When questioned about the purpose of the wire, it was stated that it was to easily find the remains after burial and to tie the bones together, where members would wear the bones as a necklace. The detained men were then taken to the ranch, where they were forced to give up the locations of Mark and the other men that were sacrificed at that ranch, which were a total of 15 over a time frame of about 9 months. It was concluded that most of their other bodies belonged to rival or opposing drug dealers, although 3 of these bodies were never identified. The police also seized 234 pounds of marijuana, 108 grams of cocaine, and 12 firearms, including submachine guns. A fleet of 11 vehicles, some of which were also set up with phones, was also discovered. Although Constanzo's pot was used for stewing human remains, no signs of cannibalism were found. On April 12th, the detainees were taken to the headquarters of the Mexican Federal Judicial Police in Matamoros for an informal press conference, where hundreds of international reporters and journalists took photographs and asked questions. Elio stated that he was an ordained executioner under Constanzo, but that Constanzo had delivered the final blow to Mark. The detainees also revealed facts and information about their cult. One such fact included the membership scars. These scars were only given to select members who had enough notoriety and authority to perform a human sacrifice by themselves. Constanzo had found out about the bodies being dug up and fled town. He was later found hiding out in an apartment in Cuauhtemoc, Mexico City, with a small number of followers. When the police moved in on the location, Constanzo opened fire and began throwing money and burning it. When he ran out of ammunition, he turned to one of his followers, last name De Leon, and ordered De Leon to kill him. De Leon killed Constanzo in the apartment, and Constanzo never faced the consequences for his actions. Some of the followers or people linked to the apartment were arrested. They all had different sentences, but the judge denied bail for any of the arrested. In the end, the cult's human sacrifices ironically backfired on them. Instead of protecting them from law enforcement, it ultimately brought them to light. Mark Kilroy was only 21 when he was killed.